Here we have a Consew 206 RB-5. On the tag over here, it'll also give you the needle system, which is the length and diameter of the head of the needle. So you always use the 135x17 needles for this particular machine. You can use 135x16, which is actually a leather point needle. That's not going to denote on here. This is your stitch length. This, if you try to turn this, it's not going to turn because of this has a lock. You have to hold that in, but it's very hard to turn, and it's because it's pushing down the spring tension on this reverse lever inside the machine is what's making it really difficult. So if you hold that down a little ways, you can actually adjust this stitch length with one hand. That's your reverse. This is your tension assembly, and this is your upper thread tension adjusting knob, and this is your check spring. This little spring right here is your check spring. It's simply there to take up the excess play in the thread so it doesn't do a half hitch around a screw or something. It provides your machine with a means to manage the thread, so you don't have any problems with that. This is your inside foot, and this is your outside foot. Your inside foot is going to, if you watch here, you can see it move towards us and away from us. It's going to actually move with the needle and the lower feed dogs, giving this a triple feeding system. So the needle is going to penetrate all the layers. The top foot is going to press down and hold the fabric against the feed dogs, and the feed dogs are moving forward also, if you notice. All three devices are actually going to advance the fabric through the machine. So the needle system for this machine is 135x17. You're going to see a couple of other numbers, DPX17 or 718865. Those still all mean the same system of needle. That system of needle denotes the diameter of the head of the needle and the distance from the top of the head of the needle to the top of the eye of the needle. The blade is the size of the needle. And so any of these packages that you see a slash in between two numbers, that is a European and American sizing, that is the size of the needle. So you always have to match the size of the needle to your project. It needs to be stronger than the fabric. That'll keep you from breaking needles, stuff like that. And you also want to make sure that you have the thread match the needle. Because if the thread is too large of a diameter for the long thread groove on the outside of the needle over here, that is going to jam in there and you're not going to be able to make a good stitch. Just remember, if it has a slash, that is the size of the needle, and the system of the needle is the one you have to have for your commercial sewing machine. This one is 135x17. This little device right here is where you would attach your hemming attachment. If you wanted a taping attachment or a hemming attachment, you attach it here and it holds everything right in front of the needle so that you can get a perfect hem, seam, or a taped edge. That's what that's for. This little button right here is for your safety clutch, and if your machine decides not to sew, you're trying to sew and it's not picking up the thread, the safety clutch is there so that you don't have to bring the machine in every time if you throw the timing out. This is a weak link so that you can reset your machine yourself. If we get a look at that, we'll tilt this back, lean it on our rest peg, and right here, this is your safety clutch mechanism. So if we rotate this all the way around, you will see right there is a little hole in this bell housing. The outer bell is part of this, and the inner bell is part of this. And those two are on this lower main shaft. So if the hook assembly jams, this will give way and you won't break any parts, or you'll be able to reset your timing simply by pressing the button. And this is the cog that button is going to press into. You can actually see it right up there. You can see that moving up and down. So as you rotate the hand wheel, that little pin is going to fall into this groove, and that's going to reset your timing. To check it, it's really easy. All you have to do is rotate tilt the head back, rotate the hand wheel always in the direction of its normal sewing direction, which is towards you. And you're going to look for the ball bearing. If you don't see a ball bearing, it's going to look like the surface of this right here inside that hole. That means it is not in time. So with your left hand, you're going to hold this button down. With your right hand, you're going to rotate the hand wheel clockwise towards you, and the pin will engage in this cog, and then you can be able to rotate this around. You'll hear a loud click whenever this clicks back into place, and then you're ready to sew again. You have to make sure that your hook isn't jammed, though. That's important. Our bobbin case is right here. This is our bobbin case base. This part right here that you put the bobbin and bobbin case into is called the bobbin case base, and it's not supposed to rotate. So if I rotate this hand wheel, you will see it's not rotating. This does have a position bracket finger is right there. This is a pretty critical adjustment. You do not want to loosen this screw. If you have thread wrapped around in your machine, it's going to be usually right there. But you do not want to loosen this screw because this is an adjustment. This is just that position bracket back up and down in this orientation. And it has to be set correctly. Same thing with this. This is your bobbin case opener right here, and you don't want to adjust that or move that or this right here because that's going to throw that adjustment off and your stitch is not going to form correctly. If we take and rotate this, and you watch in the position bracket opening there, you will see that that is opening and closing. And so it's important that that functions like it's supposed to. So if you do change this, or this, that's not going to function like it's supposed to, and then you will need to bring it in. With your bobbin and bobbin case, you have a anti-backlash spring down inside this bobbin case, and what that's to do is to keep this bobbin from overspinning should the thread just get jerked. Adds a little bit of tension to it so it won't have a problem. Your bobbin, when you put your bobbin in your bobbin case, and if you pull a little bit of thread, your bobbin should be turning clockwise while you're looking at the bobbin. So we're going to pull our thread into this groove, and then around and under this spring. And the whole idea of this is you can't pull that thread out of there. It won't be able to come out. If you look up inside in there, there's two little nubs right there and right there. Those two little nubs are guides for this part of the bobbin case, this opening right here. When you go to put this in, the best way to do it is to always put your thread over your thumb, so that way it's easy for you to put your bobbin in the bobbin case and the bobbin case base then. And you just roll this around and it'll kind of find its home, and then you can push that in. It's a good idea to pull a little bit of thread, maybe an inch or two, and what that does is that ensures that the bobbin case is installed correctly, because if it's not, it'll fall out. And it will also make sure that your thread is not hung up inside the bobbin case anywhere. That'll make sure that you're able to sew with this machine without having a rat's nest right at the beginning. You have an oil sump here. You have a red line here. The book's going to tell you to fill that oil all the way up to that red line. You really don't need to do that. You'll just wind up with lots of oil in here. Just put enough oil in the bottom so that the wick is just barely in the oil. And that wick is going to take oil all the way to all different parts of your sewing machine. There's also several different places where you need to oil, and if you start looking on these machines, you're going to actually find a lot of places. So to give you kind of an idea, any place where you see metal rubbing against another piece of metal, if you rotate the hand wheel, you'll be able to pick those out. They need a tiny drop every once in a while. There are certain areas, right here, there's a little hole that takes oil. Right here is a little hole that takes oil. Right here is a little hole that takes oil. So they're all over the place, and your book will tell you all the different places for you to oil it. You really don't need to concern yourself too much with the whole machine. The main thing you want to make sure you oil is your hook assembly. And I'll show you in particular where. If you look at that little ridge right there, that is holding this bobbin case base into the hook. Right there, that's where you're going to want to make sure you lube this hook before you start sewing each time. And it's better to put a tiny drop often than a gallon every 10 years. In here, you will also see some wicks here that you can add some oil to. And you have to look for them, but there again, your book is going to show you. There's a little hole right there, which is for oil. As this goes up and down, this needs a drop of oil. As this moves back and forth in here, it needs a drop of oil. You also have and there's lots of places, other places in there, but you also have the top of the shaft here that needs lubricant. You have down inside here, the top of this take-up lever needs lubricant. You'll have red holes all over the machine, and those are for a drop every once in a while. There is one in the back here. It's easier to open this and shine a light down in there so that you can actually see where you're inserting your oil into, and you can hit the hole. It's down inside there quite a ways, but it's easier to do that. Open this up, shine a flashlight down in there. This is also part of your wicking system for oiling, and the easy rule is if you put your finger on that and you see lubricant on your finger, you don't need to add any more to that. So it just takes a couple of drops. There's a couple other places down in here you want to make sure you put a couple of drops of oil just to make sure that everything stays lubricated. That's super important because you don't have the wear if you lubricate it. If you don't lubricate it, you will have a lot of wear and play, and then you have to replace parts and adjustments have to be compensated for. So to thread this machine, you have a detangler here. You can go through and then around and then through, and that way this should take any tangles out that might wind up in your thread between the cone and your sewing machine. You also have a detangler here. In the book, it's going to tell you to go through, around, through, and around and through. All three of these holes are going to have thread in them. The problem with that is it creates an excessive tension if the thread hangs up anywhere between there and the machine. This is going to create an excessive tension, whether they call it barber poling. It's best to go through and then back through and then back through, which will still take all of the tangles out, but it will not affect your tension at all. On this side of the tension, you do have a pin, and a lot of people will take this thread as you go around through the tension disc and up over this pin. You don't want to do that because all you're going to do is cut the pin off, and it's going to cause problems with your seams because that pin, once it gets a groove cut in it, it's going to start shaving the edges of your thread off as you're sewing. Ideally, what you do is you hold onto the thread while you pull the thread into the tension disc, and if you notice these tension discs, you'll see them open slightly when I raise the presser foot. So always raise your presser foot whenever you go to thread your machine. You're going to pull it over and down through and then around under your check spring, and there's a little catch right here. So this is important that you hold on to this while you pull the thread up, and it will get behind that catch so it can't come out. And then you have a thread guide here. You're going to thread it through the take-up lever from right to left, and then this thread guide, and then your needle bar thread guide, and then we're going to thread our needle. This felt right here is for thread lube. If you're going to sew webbing or something that's super dense, you can actually get so much friction on the needle that you can actually melt the thread because the needle will get too hot. That's what this little felt is for thread lube. So we've got our needle threaded, and now we're going to pick up our bobbin thread. If I turn this and then I stop right there, now my needle is up, you can see, but my take-up lever is not up, and I can't pull this out of there because it's still halfway around the hook. Once the hook turns loose of the thread, the take-up lever, the thread take-up lever, is going to take up the excess loop that has gone around the hook and the bobbin case. So it's important when you start and stop your machine, you always start with the needle in the up position and the take-up lever in the up position. So we're going to turn our take-up lever up, and you see I pick up my bobbin thread. You really don't need to concern yourself much with trying to hold the bobbin thread. It's not necessary, but you do want to hold your upper thread, and the reason you want to hold that is because remember the take-up lever is pulling the thread, and so it can pull the tail in, and then it'll leave a loop underneath, and then the hook will come around and pick up a second and third and fourth loop, and then you wind up having a lot of problems underneath your needle plate. Now I'm just going to hold my thread, my top thread, with my finger for at least a couple of stitches. Once that's okay, I can continue to sew, and that will tie my stitch at the end. And remember, needle up, take-up lever up. And the material comes out nice and easy. Got a perfect tie off there. You could do that also at the beginning if you want. But that's the idea of how to start and stop your machine. Take-up lever up, needle up. If we were going to adjust our tension, just to give you kind of an idea, I'm going to change this tension a lot. And we're going to look at the bottom of this. Remember, I held my threads for at least 2 stitches. We're going to sew to the end. I'm going to stop with my needle down. The reason I'm going to stop with my needle down, I'm going to use my knee lever, and I can then have it hold my place so I can turn a corner. But if you look at the bottom side of this, that is horrible. Okay? If the threads are looping on the bottom, you can see what color thread that is. That's our upper thread. Threads looping on the bottom is virtually always going to be the upper thread tension. If we get the same loops on top, that usually means that the thread is not in the bobbin case thread tension. If we want to correct that, we have to actually pull that knot up. So the 2 threads are going to cross over each other in the fabric. That's ideal. If you want to raise that knot up into the fabric, you're going to tighten this righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So we're going to tighten this to raise that knot, to pull that knot up, and we want to pull this knot up. So we're going to use our meter. We have your wrist is your meter, so I'm going to go 1, 2, and then we're going to see if it makes a difference. And there again, I'm going to stop with my needle down. This is called burying the needle. Anytime you want to hold your fabric to add something else or to turn a corner, always bury the needle. You don't want to just barely put the needle in, because if you notice, you can see that needle flexing like crazy right there. Well, you can redirect that needle and it can have a problem. So if you see there, that made a big difference between this and between this seam. And that one right there, it's close, but I still see the top thread there. So I'm going to go 1, 2, and we're going to do another seam. I'll bury the needle. And now I don't see the top thread there. I still see it there a little bit. That was the previous stitch. And so that's where we started. That's a terrible seam. That's not a horrible seam, but that's not the way it's supposed to look. That's the way it's supposed to look. And so you see how fast we got there just with 3 little seams, little short seams, and adjusting our upper thread tension. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So if you were getting knots showing up on the top, and you pull your material out and you pull on the bobbin thread, and you know you have tension there on your bobbin thread, it's probably because this upper thread may be too tight. So then in that case, you would loosen it off to allow that knot to go down into the fabric. When you turn this to the right or clockwise, this is going to increase the tension. It's going to pull the thread or the knot up into the fabric. If you have too much knot on top, you are going to loosen the tension regulating knob to allow the knot to go down into the fabric. Simple as it gets, you're just simply controlling the knot with this right here. Once the bobbin case thread tension is set, you don't need to adjust it unless you have zero tension, and usually that means that underneath, between the bobbin case tension spring and the bobbin case body, there might be some debris that has built up in there that you can pull out of there. So this is our bobbin winder spindle. We're going to put our bobbin on here, and this, once we get our bobbin on, this is going to engage the winder. It pushes the pulley back inside of here up against the belt. It's going to rotate this and fill the bobbin. That right there is a little oil hole, and every once in a while, if you don't see any oil in there, you need to add a little drop of oil. When you're going to thread this machine, you're going to come through this hole, around these tension, just between them, and come out, and then you're going to, everybody attaches the thread differently on the bobbin. I usually thread it from the inside to the out, and I pinch the thread really, really tight, and after about a couple of passes, that thread, if you hold it real tight, will actually bust right off. You can also just trim the thread at the edge of the bobbin. This is going to shut off as it gets full. So if you see that as that pushes that, the thread fills up on the bobbin, it's going to push that and make your bobbin winder shut off quicker. The more you tighten this screw, the further down this feeler is going to be, and so the more you'll get on the thread. You don't want your bobbin, you want your bobbin to be wound less than full. You don't want it over full, because then it'll wedge inside the bobbin case. So that's how you adjust that feeding. If it's not winding evenly, you can loosen this screw, and this is going to slide back and forth so that you can actually get it to wind evenly on your bobbin. Make sure you push your bobbin all the way up to here, so it's the same every time. We have down below this machine, you have the 2 feet, and they're going to have a stepping action. Okay. If you want them to step higher, if you have to go over a real tall seam, you can step over that by loosening this wing nut, and then this mechanism here will slide up and down. The more up you have it, the higher these 2 presser feet are going to step, and the further down, the lower it's going to step. So the average setting is about a third of the way up, where most everybody uses it. If you put it all the way up all the time, it really hammers on your machine. So it's actually better to, if you don't need it all the way up, then leave it down part way, so it'll still function for what you need, but you won't be hammering your machine. This wing nut here, you want to make sure when you go to tighten this wing nut back, when you go to tighten this back, make sure that this wing part right here is not running into this. So make sure you tighten it enough so that the wing nut is not going to run into this part right here. This is your lifting lever for your presser foot. You see how I've turned this? Just make sure you turn it 1 or 2 stitches to make sure this wing nut is not going to run into this. It will break this wing off of the wing nut. So almost nobody is actually going to tilt the machine back to take the bobbin case and bobbin out of the machine or to put a new one in. What they're going to do is they're going to slide this slide plate open so that they can see down in there. And remember, you want to make sure you hold the bobbin like this so that you have a thumb and a finger on the bobbin, and just put this thread over, that way it can't get caught in there. And you're just simply going to look it into the hole, and this should rotate around, click, and then you pull on the thread just a little bit, about 1 inch, to make sure it's not hung up. Then we're going to pick up our bobbin thread by holding this needle up, take up lever up. We have to return back to that position, and there we have take up lever up. We have pulled up our bobbin thread, and we are ready to sew. So here we are, ready to sew. Remember, I'm going to hold my thread, the top thread. I'm just putting my finger on it for at least 2 stitches. If the bobbin thread is there too, that's fine, but you don't really have to worry about holding your bobbin thread. At least 2 stitches. I'm going to hold my reverse lever down, back up to the edge of the fabric, and then continue my my seam all the way to the end. And remember, I'm going to stop with my needle up and my take-up lever up. And my fabric will come out nice and easy. You have to remember to always lift your knee lift or your presser foot lifter far enough that it opens up your tension disc. See how those are kind of loose? And then you can pull your fabric out easy. And there we have our perfect seam. This one right here, last one. Well, I hope that helps a lot of you with your Consew 206RB. There's a lot of other commercial machines that are going to have a lot of similarities, so it's not just for the Consew 206. This will work for a lot of the other machines. You can take and like and subscribe, and then you get notified whenever we have other videos that we put out. It's a good idea to share if you can, and leave me a comment whether you got something out of this video or if it helped you at all. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks again for watching.